Shalom everybody, shalom and shalom aleichem to Rabbi Silver, and shalom aleichem to all of you. Bezrat Hashem, in the next few minutes, there will be more of our friends. And over here in Rechavia, we know that every person is a world, literally. So we have right away over here, we have Baruch Hashem, not 6, 7, 8 worlds. That's amazing, an amazing accomplishment, a great beginning. It's an awesome beginning. I am very, very excited for this new initiative of the MIDRASH RECHAVIA. Baruch Hashem, this is going to bring a great measure of learning Torah, adding learning Torah over here in Chabad of Rechavia and in the entire area. Very soon we're going to have a very special guest that he's going to come probably for 2 or 3 minutes. His name is Dr. Yakir Kaufman. He is one today, throughout the last year, he's one of the heads of in the Misrad Briyut, the Ministry of Health. A dear friend, and it's his initiative to start this Beit Midrash, and it will be a great honor with your permission. B'vakasha, wherever we're up to, he'll say just a few words. It will be real nachas for him because he has an out-of-the-box thinking, and it's a huge zchut. The fact that we're starting this Beit Midrash today is divine providence. First of all, it's a short time after the giving of the Torah, after the Chag of Shavuot, and we're always looking for new opportunities to have more shiurim and to build learning Torah. So this is one of the best hachlatot, resolutions that I can think of, to build our learning Torah, Bezrat Hashem, throughout the year, and for many happy, healthy years, Bezrat Hashem, number one. Number two, in a nutshell, we talk about in this week's Parsha Shelach. In the new Parsha, we talk about the meraglim, about the spies. And if there is one thing where the spies went wrong, was that they thought that learning Torah is good to be in the desert, with a spiritual envelope, in a spiritual bubble, with no problems, just being able to enjoy spirituality. And coming to Israel would be rolling up your sleeves and getting involved in materialism, and we wouldn't really be able to dedicate ourselves to learning Torah. So that was one of the grave mistakes of the meraglim, of the spies. The mistake is that the point of learning Torah, it's wonderful to learn Torah in a cloud, enveloped in a nice, comfortable feeling. But the objective is that the Torah that we learn, we should merge with the world. There shouldn't be two different realms of the spiritual realm and the materialistic realm. We should be one big happy family. We should be able to learn Torah in a way, to share the messages of Torah that we know with our friends, social media, write svarim. The Rebbe was very much into writing a sefer. You have ideas, you want to write down your Torah thoughts and spread them around. Do it, because it's only going to be better for yourself and for your environment and for all of Am Yisrael. I want to thank Rabbi Diamond very, very much, and his Rebbitzin, Mrs. Diamond, for preparing soon, Bezrat Hashem, at the end of this shiur. Before the second shiur, we're going to have a wonderful light breakfast, really excellent. And Rabbi Diamond, of course, worked very, very hard. He's continuing to work hard to build up the attendance and the Magidei Shiurim. And if you have any ideas, this is a great time to mention. If you have any friends, this is focused clearly on our dear friends in the golden age, which is very important to get out, especially at this time as Corona, Baruch Hashem, is fading away. But we all feel this great need to be there with people, learn Torah with our friends. So let's make this the greatest success ever, Bezrat Hashem. Thank you so much to all of you. Big Yasher Koach.
Thank you. Good morning, Shavua Tov. Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Rabbi Diamond, and thank you to Chabad of Rechavia for honoring me by asking me to be, I think, the kickoff, the first Magid Shur of the first Shur of Bezrat Hashem, what's going to be a tremendous, successful initiative of this new Beit Midrash for the Golden Ages. And those of you who are sitting here at the table, in another 20, 30 years, you'll start to understand what it means to be a golden age. In the meantime, us young kids will sit here, all of us together, and we'll prepare for our golden age. I will be teaching from my book, my new book, The Weight of Gold, of which those of you who are here today have the good fortune to receive a free copy. My approach in writing this book, I'll tell you very, very briefly. My wife and I made Aliyah 3 years ago, Baruch Hashem. And we had been here for only about a month.
Where from?
Sorry?
Where from?
We were living in central New Jersey, which is, there's all kinds of reasons to leave there, but okay. Anyway, we're here, Baruch Hashem, in Jerusalem. And within about a month of my arriving here, one of my business partners back in the States, and this is all written in the introduction to the book, went through a tremendous, very, very profound spiritual crisis. And so I was on the phone with him a lot during that period, and our other partners were there meeting with him and helping him out. But after a certain point, I realized that there's only so much that I could do at a distance. And one day I asked him, is there anything else that I can do that would be useful to you to help you through what you're going through right now? And he immediately said, I read the Bible every day. This young man is half my age. He's a devout Christian. He's in every possible way different presents differently from me, right? Young black man who grew up in poverty in the inner city, and yet who works tremendously hard on himself. And so he said, I read the Bible every day, but I don't understand anything about the Jewish approach to the Old Testament. And maybe you could give me some insight, some Bible verses for personal growth. So I said to him, let me see what I can do. And I sat down after that phone call and I wrote him a note on the Parsha. I wrote him a note describing our relationship to the Torah text, how we read through it every year. And I wrote him a note about the Parsha, and from that sprang a year of writing him a weekly note, approaching the Parsha not from the perspective of what are the mitzvot and how does it help us to be a better Jew, but the Torah is a user's manual for the human soul. And how do we approach that as human beings? Because if the Torah has truth, if it is truly true, then it's universally true and it's always true. And those of us who are blessed to be what we call Am Karov Lashem, the chosen people, we were not chosen because we are different or we're special. We were chosen to have the obligation to live our lives in such a way that the rest of the world sees the truth and the value of this book. And that is, the vision, the ultimate vision of Tanakh. And we say it every day, 3 times every day. B'yom hu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. Right? So the vision of the Torah and the vision of Tanakh and what we understand to be God's vision for us in the world is not for us to be increasingly apart from and different from the rest of the world, but for us to increasingly get the message out to the world and bring them closer to the truth of God, Ezrat Hashem. And so my approach in writing these Parsha notes was not to say, as I said, this is the mitzvah and here's what we learn about, here are the number of mitzvahs in the Parsha and so on and so forth. But rather, how does this book talk to each individual human being? And so, just as an example, from the very beginning, in Parshat Bereshit, the opening of the book of Genesis, my approach, I took the verse where God says, Na'aseh Adam, let us make Adam, let us make a human being. And of course we know that there are rabbinical commentary where God turned to the angels and said, what do you think? And the angels said, it's not a good idea, bad idea, because Adam, he's going to sin, he's going to do evil, he's going to do all kinds of bad things. And God said, yeah, but he's not going to do all those bad things all the time. And anyway, I already made up my mind, so thank you for your input, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, but how can I take that and make that speak to everybody? And I was thinking, if you read British novels, let's say, from the 19th century, you often come across a passage that says, now, dear reader, gentle reader, I present to you, or gentle reader, consider for a moment, right? So I'm thinking, with Na'aseh Adam, maybe it's the Torah speaking to the reader, speaking to us. Maybe the Torah is saying, okay, let's you and me together create a protagonist that has meaning to you. Somebody that you can identify with, because if you don't identify with the central character from page 1, you're not going to read page 2, and you're not going to get my message. And so how does the text draw us in humanly? So that was the approach that I've tried, B'ezrat Hashem, to take throughout the book, and I like to think that I had at least a certain amount of success at it, Baruch Hashem. So now, as the rabbi pointed out, we're right in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. And really kind of all hell is breaking loose. A very, very quick summary to get us up to Parshat Shelach, to where we are right now. The Abarbanel talks about the kind of general structure of the 5 books of Torah. The book of Genesis, which gives the ancestry of the entire world, up through the forebears of the Jewish people, the creation of Israel, and a world which will receive and which will desperately need the Torah. The book of Exodus, introducing the fundamental Jewish theme of exile and redemption, the revelation of Torah, the notion of holiness in the world, and then the creation of, or the building of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan. And the book of Leviticus, where holiness finds its home within the tabernacle, and it's the kind of the nuts and bolts and the time and motion aspect, if you will, of how we functionally bring holiness into the world. And the Torah law is both sacred, but it's also normative behavior. It's how do we act from day to day, moment to moment. And now, in the book of Numbers, it's the struggle to lead the people. It's Israel's journeys, wanderings in the wilderness, rebellion, delay, despair. 40 years in the wilderness, leading to the closing of the story of exile, and bring us, B'ezrat Hashem, where we will arrive to the book of Deuteronomy, of Devarim. So, interestingly, 2 weeks ago we read about the dedication of the tabernacle. And those of you who sit through this every year in Shul, you know, we have 12 tribes, and each tribe has a Nasi, as a prince, the great leaders of the tribe, and each of the 12 princes comes and brings a gift to the dedication of the tabernacle. And we read each of their gifts in order, and it's all the same. The only thing that's different in each of those 12 sections is the name of the tribe and the name of the Nasi, the name of the head of the tribe. So, and again, I'm never going to say, Chas v'chalila, God forbid, I'm never going to say that the way that I'm interpreting a text at any given time is right. I'm never going to say that it's the only way to interpret the text, and I'm never going to say that it's the only way I would interpret the text. However, again, as this book sprang from a very specific view of hashkafa, of a view of trying to make the Torah moment by moment relative to a person living in the world today and struggling to be a realized human being in the world today. So I've approached this more in, as you will see, let's say socio-political terms, some of which may be a little bit at odds with what you've learned in yeshiva, and that's okay, because if we don't expand our minds, then our minds will shrivel and die. And I'm not telling you what to think or how to think, I'm merely telling you how, at a certain point, I thought about these texts. And the reason that I'm still teaching this book, or which I just published, is that I believe a lot of it is very, very relevant. So, what happened at the end of the book of Leviticus? We have the tabernacle, we have, you know, the clouds are coming down, and God is the presence of God, and the Kohanim are going in and out, and they're doing their daily service, and everything is great. And God is speaking to Moshe, and through Moshe speaking to us from that empty space on top of the Aron Kodesh, between the wings of the Kruvim, the wings of the angels, and it's all very beautiful. And there's a moment, if you will, of perfect unity. And as the rabbis taught, you know, the Midrash says, when we stood at Mount Sinai, we were as one person with one heart. We were literally like the unified body of Israel, right? And that carries through the book of Leviticus in a certain sense, because this is like how we act as a unified body. It's not that the Kohanim are one group of people and the Levim are another group, but we have like the head and the heart and the hands and the legs and the arms and everything functioning together. We have a healthy body. But now at the beginning of the book of Numbers, things start to break apart. And as we read through this book of Numbers, you will see that it's just one conflict after another. It's one political challenge to leadership after another. It's one group of people who can't accept their role in the world after another. And so I want to suggest that this is foreshadowed in Parshat Naso, in the dedication or the consecration of the tabernacle, because why do 12 different leaders of 12 different tribes all bring exactly the same the same offering. Well, one nice way to say it is, well, that they don't differentiate. They want to show that they're all the same. But another way to say it, to look at it, is no, I'm bringing the same offering as everybody else. But I don't accept that you say, here's the offering, and it was brought by Tom and Dick and Harry and Manny, Mo and Jack and Fred. No, I want my own. And mine has my name on it. And I don't care about you other 11 guys, because I have to have my name on my offering. And how many times do we walk into a shul and we see somebody who we don't recognize, who's written a check for $1 million, and we never know about it? But how many times do we walk into a shul and we see a plaque that says, this bookcase that cost $59 at IKEA was dedicated by Fred and Myra, and this Aron Kodesh that cost $350, et cetera, you get my point. Okay? What throughout the book of Numbers we see over and over again, people who are not good at, as Milton wrote famously in his incredible sonnet, they also serve who only stand and wait. And the fact that the guy who sits on the bench during the World Series also gets a ring, it's not enough. Everybody wants to be on the field. And God's world doesn't work that way. And one of the biggest challenges in this world is to understand our own personal tafkid, our own personal purpose, our own personal, the biggest question is, what does God expect from me right now? And it's a question that we must confront all the time. We struggle to answer, and it's in that struggling to answer it over and over again that, as Hashem, with God's help, we can be somewhat effective human beings. So I'd like to invite, if anybody wants to read, I'd like to have this. I'm offering this to be a participatory session. Could open. We're back one. Sorry, page 210. I apologize. Parsha Shelach. I got a little ahead of myself. Shalom Aleichem.
Okay, to see or not to see?
I apologize. Parsha Shelach, number chapter 37, to see or not to see. Yes, my apologies. You'll edit that out.
And it shall be to you for a fringe, and you shall see it, and you will remember.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Dr. Yakir Kaufman, and he was the one that gave the initiative to start this, as Rabbi Goldberg mentioned previously. So we would like to ask him to say a few words.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
It's
an honor to have you here.
English.
Just first of all, I'm very, very excited. It's really, I'm a neurologist. I'm a behavior neurologist. I work in the Ministry of Health. I used to be the medical head of Herzog Hospital until 2 years ago. And my main work is work with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Except for that, I wanted to say that Kol Levi Yitzchak is the most important miftzah from all the miftzoim that the Rabbi has, because it's the only miftzah, I don't know if Rabbi said that before, that was named after his dear father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. And what I see in Chabad centers, that the Kol Tiferet Zkenim is really the cornerstone of all the activities of the Beit Chabad. The fact that the fact that you are doing the biggest mitzvah and sitting down and learning is really the cornerstone of all the. I mean, Chabad centers do excellent work in many things, but this is like the kvios of this shiur is unbelievable. The other thing is that we know from studies, and I'll be short, this is my last two sentences, is that it is essential, and this is why 50 years ago the Rabbi talked about Kol Levi Yitzchak, is essential for the well-being and the cognitive well-being and the spiritual well-being of whoever takes part in this. And I just wanted to say, in the Corona, I also established I didn't do it, but it was my pushing in Givat Mordechai, Chabad house. And suddenly, after the Corona, people didn't come. And, God forbid, they were alone at home, very isolated and deteriorated. And I told the Reb, please tell everyone to come back, even with, with all the precautions. When they came back, it was just like a miracle. People got back to their... Anyways, it's so important what you're doing, and B'ezrat Hashem, I hope to be part of your group later on. B'ezrat Hashem.
Well, thank you for making this happen.
Yishal
It's
Koach.
a big honor to be
Yishal Koach.
here.
Thank you very much. Be well.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Hanoch, I'm sorry, we're on page 210,
Okay,
please.
we'll start there. Now, to see or not to see. And it shall be to you for a fringe, and you will see it, and you will remember all the commandments of the Lord, and you will do them. And you will not seek after the longing of your heart and the longing of your eyes. This week's Torah portion tells the story of Moses sending spies to reconnoiter the land of Canaan prior to the Israelites' entry into the Promised Land. In a nutshell, the book of Numbers is about leadership, about the transition from wandering desert tribes centered around a single charismatic leader, Moses, to a functioning society with a hierarchy and a leadership structure. In last week's portion, Moses' father, Jethro, leads the Israelites to return to his own people, the Midianites. Jethro was the person who first introduced the idea of hierarchical division of responsibilities, which enabled Moses to delegate the responsibilities of leadership. Now, however, the tribes which comprise the desert clan are beginning to coalesce around their own important figures, and the struggle for dominance is emerging. It is just at this point that Jethro announces he is returning to his home, and Moses, almost in desperation, begs him to stay. But Jethro goes off, and the remainder of the book of Numbers recounts a sequence of problems and failures of leadership. The story of the spies recounted in this portion is a defining episode in the history of the Jewish nation. Moses sends 12 men, leaders of the tribes of Israel, to spy out the land of Canaan in order to form a plan for upcoming Israelite entry and conquest. He explicitly instructs them to list the characteristics of the land and to scout out its people. In other words, military intelligence gathering. When the spies return, they give a straightforward and accurate accounting of their observations, including the difficulties people will encounter in attempting to conquer the land. They are interrupted when Caleb, one of the 12 spies, jumps up and exhorts the people to go, heedless of whatever difficulties may lie ahead. The other spies shout him down, with the exception of Joshua, who remains silent. This dramatic sequence results in the Israelites being condemned to wander the wilderness for 40 years. God reacts far more harshly to disbelief than to disobedience.
Yeah, excuse me. So, thank you. I just want to make one observation, which is something that will come up again later on throughout the book of Numbers, which is that, and I'm embarrassed that I can't remember in whose book I read this, because I always like to quote in the name of whoever said something. But it's very striking that throughout the Torah, the violations of laws between humans are treated very leniently. Eye for an eye, well, okay, you write him a check. You killed somebody, you have to pay the family. But the smallest ritual transgression is met with the harshest of repercussions. Nadav and Avihu are carried away, and they want to show their love for God, and next thing you know, they're burnt to a crisp. And so there's a very striking, from a human perspective, almost an incomprehensible and harsh disconnect between the way God enforces, if you will, the way God expects us to deal with one another, and the way God enforces the way that God expects us to deal with God. There is no wiggle room, there is no flexibility in the relationship with God. And yet God expects us to have great flexibility in the relationship with one another. In a certain sense, we'll see, but as Hashem, when we come to the end of Sefer B'Midbar, the end of the book of Numbers, that this kind of its kind of signature expression is in the cities of refuge. that a person who kills another person can go and live the rest of their lives someplace else where the family members are not permitted to take any kind of revenge. Anyway, do I have another volunteer to take up reading from here?
I'll do it.
You'll be next.
When the spies return, they get a straight football.
No, we're at the next paragraph, the portion
Read
ends.
that? Oh, next paragraph. The portion ends with the passage enjoining the Israelites to make tzitzit on the corners of their clothes, a practice we continue to observe to this day. One occasionally observes Jews with strings hanging down over their belts, depends on where you live. These are tzitzit tied on a four-cornered undergarment, an ongoing observance of this biblical command. The reason we are joined to wear these tzitzit is so that you will see it and you will remember all the mitzvot of the Lord and you will do them. You will not seek after the longing of your heart and the longing of your eyes. In the Torah, the sense of sight is problematic. At the moment of the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, we are told the Israelites saw the Egyptians dead on the shore and saw the mighty hand that God had raised against Egypt. And upon seeing, they believed in God and God's servant Moses. In this portion, however, the men who saw clearly and who accurately reported what they saw are punished, while the ones who deny the clear evidence of their own eyes, Caleb and Joshua, are rewarded. They are the three males of the generation that left Egypt who were survived in the land of Canaan. The passage from the splitting of the Sea of Reeds and the ensuing Song of the Sea are read in the daily Jewish prayer service each night. They are comfortable reminders that we continually seek concrete proof of God and a challenge to us to recognize that true faith does not rest on factual corroboration.
Anybody like to comment on that, on this last passage?
This is the first time I've seen this particular drush that the men were accurately reporting when they, I've never seen that interpretation of their reporting of the 10 spies. Never, I've seen it. I mean, they did report some things accurately. They brought back the grapes. They talked about how plentiful the land is. But then they proceeded to exaggerate about the people who lived there, that they were all giants. Maybe some of them were giants. We don't have much proof of that. And that we were as grasshoppers in their eyes. Well, that's an opinion. Maybe somebody said you look like grasshoppers to us, but I've never heard that interpretation.
I think you'll find that I would argue, and I do argue, that the description of the land and of the people is an accurate one, is from their perspective an objectively accurate one. The notion of being as grasshoppers, it's not just that we were grasshoppers in their eyes, we were grasshoppers in our own eyes, that the spies felt themselves as inadequate and felt that they were afraid to go up. But I think that, and the argument that I make, and I think is very important for us to at least consider and admit the possibility of, is that these men did exactly what they were sent to do. And the problem arose not from a dispute over what was factual, but that there was an overall failure of leadership. There were 12 men who were the heads of their tribes, and they were sent to do a military reconnaissance. They were sent out to go and figure out what was there, but also how to overcome the obstacles. None of them took upon himself the task of saying, well, they're fortified over here, but I found the back path over here. Well, these guys have these guys, did you guys ever see the movie Lawrence of Arabia? You know, where he says, we cannot attack Chabad, they have guns. And he says, yes, but the guns are all pointing to the sea if we attack from the rear. Okay, I mean, nobody took that attitude. Nobody took the approach of, okay, it's going to be difficult, but let's figure out a way. Rather, as we saw with the 12 offerings in the tabernacle, each leader said, well, this is what I saw, and I don't care what anybody else has to say. And so everybody wants to be in charge. And as a consequence of everybody wanting to be in charge, nothing gets done. Worse, it leads, as we see, to a disaster, another 38 years of wandering. Please.
Okay. Isn't that part of the story that we're facing today? That we have the challenges that we face, that Hashem has brought before us, and it's our responsibility to find the options that we have to be able to skirt around those obstacles and be able to be able to find triumph in the tools to be able to overcome those obstacles. We had it with the COVID-19. We had it in the last war with Gaza, and it's a continuing story of who we are as a people.
I think I couldn't have said it better, thank you. And I think it's totally a question of personal responsibility for each human being in every instance, because no human being does not face challenges. Was it the Freudig already? It said, "Chatchila ariber," right? You have challenges, just jump over them, right? Yes, please.
Yeah, I don't think that they did their job. If you're collecting information, military intelligence, it's how you're going to use the information to accomplish the task that you were assigned to do. And they are totally negligent in that and do a great disservice to their people.
I agree. So you were basically, what I said is that they got the information.
It was not objective.
But they did not do, no, they got the objective information, but they did not do their leadership job with the information. In other words, they did not say, oh, well, there's a big mountain over here, but I found a path around it. Oh, there's a strong wall over here, but I found a weak spot in their defenses back. So I think we're not disagreeing on that, right? They saw, but they did not understand. They saw, but they did not discern. They saw, but they did not analyze. And they saw, and then they came back, and they expected everybody else. They said to Moses, well, I don't know. I went and I saw this big, strong guy over there, so I don't know what to do with it. So in my mind, this is just a tremendous and tragic failure of leadership. That these were the leaders of the tribes, and yet, as you're pointing out, they didn't do their job. They only reported, and they didn't think about it. They didn't use their leadership or their analytic. They didn't use their mind. They used their eyes.
Well, it's questionable, and we don't know this, what their initial intent was anyway. Because perhaps they wanted to be in this spiritual nirvana land and not connect to the great potential of the physical world to complement the spiritual and to integrate the two together. So I don't know if it was a bad selection on Moses' part, but it seems that their motivation was not, how can I do this?
Right. There's actually a midrash that says that they knew that when they went into the land, Moshe was going to die. And they were afraid of what would happen to them without his leadership and without his teaching. So consistent with what Rabbi Goldberg said a moment ago, of sitting in their little holy bubble out in the midbar, out in the desert, not having to deal with the problems of the day-to-day world, not having to engage with the reality of building a society and getting along with each other. But at the same time, I think that midrash is picking up on what I focus on here, which is that the leaders don't want to lead. They are the leaders, but they're not leading. You have a title, you have a job, you're appointed. Okay, Yehoshua is appointed, Joshua is designated to be the leader, and Moshe at a certain point says to God, well, when God says to Moses, you're going to die, Moses does not say, oh, please don't kill me. Oh, please, I don't deserve. Oh, please, I want to live. There's all this midrash about how he's so upset that he's going to die. The only thing that he actually says is you can't leave the people without a leader. And God says, well, Joshua's going to take over. And Moses says, but he's not ready. God says, I don't care. It's his time, right? You have to be, so when you are called, you're never going to be 100% ready. None of us is ever going to be completely ready, but we need to be willing to step forward and do what we can when we're called. And what I hear you saying, what I agree with, the way I hear it, is that they did not take that responsibility on themselves.
They were leading with a different purpose.
Well,
it's like we could say the leaders of the United Nations. They have a miserable they're leading, but it's for a miserable purpose.
Agreed. Please.
Why didn't Moses know that Joshua was as ready as he'd ever be? I mean, he was with him all those years. He was his right-hand man.
Right.
You would think he would have known it. The objection is strange to me.
Well, I didn't make it up.
No.
I hear what you're saying. But maybe from his own experience, he wasn't ready either. God called him at the bush. He said, really, like I can't do this. there's so many reasons why I can't do this. And God grabbed him and said, no, you're going to do it. And so he did. Right? And perhaps he knows better than anybody else what it's like to be called to do something that perhaps no human being can completely accomplish.
Since I dealt with political campaigns in America and in Israel, I can see here opportunistic effort of those people who would like to get into leadership and possibly to stay in a comfortable, situation in the midbar and not to get the challenge. And I used to gather intelligence gathering for Israel before the 6th War. But we didn't spread it all over in the press. We went to the headquarters wherever, and we told, and that's what these people possibly did. They wanted to use it as political campaign to become leaders of new tribe or new whatever. And so instead of just going to Moses and tell him, they went all over the place and say, hey, we don't go there, be careful. We have to stay here and we will lead you. As you say, Moses might die and we'll take over. So
this is a little bit like sources close to the leadership speaking on condition of anonymity because they're not authorized to talk about the subject, said, hey, it's really dangerous. We can't go into the land of Canaan because they're bigger and stronger than us.
Yeah.
Okay, let's finish reading. Who would like to take over? Do we have another volunteer?
Well, I was left.
Page 212 at the top. The Israelites are surrounded by miracles.
The Israelites are surrounded by miracles, but no sooner is one miracle performed for us than we turn around and accuse God of abandoning us. We lived through the miracles and the plagues in Egypt. We were saved and saw the Egyptians dead at the Sea of Reeds. We were fed manna and given water from a miraculous well in the wilderness. And yet, in this week's portion, we can't believe that the God who brought us this far will help us overcome the obstacles and take possession of the promised land. There are multiple failures of leadership in this portion. Moses doesn't take full control of the discussion when the spies return. The spies trot out all the problems, but failed to offer solutions. Caleb, in all rah-rah about the opportunity to inherit the land, but he fails to utterly to address the very real specific objections of the other spies. In the absence of strong leadership, we fall apart as people. Notably, it is Joshua who remains silent, who will be appointed leader upon the death of Moses, a task for which he will not be fully prepared, and which of us is. After all this spying out the land, the portion ends with a warning against believing that what we see. In Hebrew, the verb used for exploring after the impulses of your heart or what you see with your eyes is the identical verb meaning to spy. Deragel.
לא תטורו. לא תטורו.
לא תטורו.
לתור את הארץ.
Yeah.
לא תטורו.
The message is clear. If you need to see in order to believe, you will not succeed. If you need to be shown the truth again and again, you really have no faith. Your mind and your soul are disconnected from one another, and so you can learn nothing. It's difficult to maintain our personal spiritual equilibrium. We find ourselves returning to the nourishment. We return to daily prayer, to study, to contemplation, all to reinforce ourselves spiritually. In fact, as the verses say, to remind ourselves of God's gifts to us and of God's requirements of us. As people functioning in the world, we need to be able to bring together the concrete reality of the world with our inner spirituality. True success for the individual comes from the ability to hold seemingly contradictory ideas, or at least disjointed ones, and make them work together. Think of it. When we say something is paradoxical, we are actually saying, I don't believe that reality has it right. In truth, when we find something to be a paradox, it is because our mind is not sophisticated enough to embrace it. It's called cognitive dissonance. And the ability to live with it and to derive certainty from doubt is what makes individual success possible. The ability to communicate that certainty in ways that help inspire others in what makes for true leadership. Over and over again, we are exhorted to look at the world from God's perspective. Don't believe what you see, the Torah is telling us. Rather, look into the world and see that which you believe. Believe in yourself and keep the faith.
Thank you.
I'd
Please.
just like to point out, you're indicating that the Torah says, don't believe what you see. And that's exactly what mass media is telling us now.
Well,
I didn't hear what
there was a
I said, there's the remark here, the Torah is telling us, don't believe what you see. And this is exactly what the mass media is telling us. It's peaceful demonstrations, buildings on fire in the back, riots, peaceful. It's what you see, it's not what's happening.
Well, that's often. I don't want to get into discussing the politics and the manipulations of mass media, but from my own experience, I think that on every side it's being misrepresented. But what we have not read is my commentary on the Song of the Sea, on the splitting of the Red Sea. Okay, and although I made reference to it in this chapter as well, that seeing is believing. And if seeing is believing, then I submit that that's actually very dangerous. What we see happen over and over again is no sooner is a miracle done for us on the way in Egypt and on our way out of Egypt and walking and our years wandering in the desert, no sooner is one miracle done for us than we turn around again and start questioning whether God is with us. Hayesh Hashem b'kabeinu imay. Right? We just came out of the splitting of the sea. There were the 12 plagues. There were the killing of the firstborn, the splitting of the sea, and the destruction of Pharaoh and his entire army. And then we turn around and we say, where's God? Where is God? God's abandoned us. Okay, so the notion of faith is very, very difficult. I'm not, by the way, God forbid, I'm not criticizing us back then, because we are the same today in a very real sense, right? And the whole notion of trying to understand, trying to maintain a faith in God, a relationship with Torah and a relationship with our identity as Jews, and then on top of that, trying to figure out our own personal purpose in the world at any given moment, it's an amazing, overwhelming challenge. And so it's no wonder that with all the challenges of being human, it's not even exclusive to us as Jews. It's no wonder that people slip into very easy sound bites. It's no wonder that people accept, oh, yes, those are good guys, those are bad guys, and those are, white and those are black and those are up and those are down, because people crave certainty. And the world is not a certain place. And so I think I would submit that the reason that we read the Song of the Sea every day in our morning prayer service, that we read Shelach is because we have this one pasuk that says, Vayar Yisrael, Israel saw, and Israel saw, and Israel, and it said Vayira'u Hashem, and the verb Yira'u that they feared is another form of the verb to see. Yira is seeing. They beheld. They were overwhelmed by the sight of. In other words, if we don't see it, it's very hard to have faith. Okay, and I think one of the reasons I would say that one of the reasons that we have to read that every day is to remind ourselves that if seeing is believing, then we don't believe. The Rabbi says that all these people trot out all of these proofs for the existence of God, and anybody who's really fixated on proving the existence of God, their problem is they don't have faith. They don't have emunah. If you have faith, I don't have to convince you of who I am. I know who I am. I don't have to convince myself. I don't have to convince you that God exists. If God exists, God exists. If you don't accept it, it's not something that's capable of proof. And so all of these exercises in trying to convince other people and trying to prove and come up with, well, this verse proves that and that person, you put it all together and it proves that God exists. No, it doesn't. God's there, and my job is here. Yes, please.
In this chapter, in which you are here, which you seem to be saying you don't have to see to believe, yet you're headlining with the mitzvah of the tzitzit.
Right.
Which is seeing is believing. So you telling
Well,
us
no,
this
the
is
tzitzit is not a belief.
paradox we have to embrace?
Yes, in a certain sense, yes. Good point. No, but the tzitzit, again, the verb that is tied, you excuse the pun, tied to the tzitzit, right, is the same verb that was used when God said to Moshe, send the men to spy. Latur et haaretz. And they went to Latur and they came back and they only saw, what I'm saying is they only saw the very superficial, here's a big fort over here and look at the size of this apple and oh my goodness, with a big fort, I'm scared, right? And so the purpose of the tzitzit is lo taturu, and not, when you look at the tzitzit, it's not that the tzitzit make us believe, right? The verse tells us to remind ourselves, because we live, as the rabbi said before, we live in a physical world. We live in this world of space, time, and motion, right? We don't live in a bubble. We don't live out in the desert where we can just, go into the Beit Midrash and close the doors and close out the outside world and sit and steig and come up with, again, the same interpretations over and over again, right? So my purpose in writing this book to a non-Jew, I think, was very clear. My purpose in presenting this to my fellow Jews is to share with the Jewish community the way that this shook up my own approach to all the things that I've learned over the years. Because if we keep on repeating the same things, this is one of the big problems in a lot of society in general, but also in a lot of the Jewish world. And I care more, if you will, in a more focused way about what happens in the world of Torah, because it's a world that I live in, and Bezrat Hashem, I try to be committed to, okay? That for thousands of years, we have been repeating Torah, but not necessarily learning Torah, right? I mean, I don't know, Rabbi, can I say something political? It's, maybe after the camera is turned off. We see quite often the results of people who have memorized big passages of the Talmud, but have not learned the lesson that the rabbis wanted to teach us in the Talmud. And I will just say that there have been some dreadful things that have happened lately that are the direct result of people who are held up to the world as great Torah scholars who obviously did not learn the lesson. And after the camera is turned off, I'll be happy to talk about it in greater detail. I believe Manuel.
Yeah, I wanted to say something that, visually speaking, believing is, the spies saw what they saw and they came and told us. Nowadays, they would have taken pictures or films or whatever and show us what they have seen that we could believe. I mean, me as a filmmaker, I educated the world in 240 films and TV shows, and it was my responsibility to bring the right picture. But sometimes it was, of course, my own point of view that I wanted to educate people or to teach them or to do propaganda. So it's nowadays it's different things for the Meraglim of then and Meraglim today.
I would just say, as a derech agav, if you spent that much time behind the camera, as Susan Sontag points out, right?
I filmed
Sorry?
I filmed there.
Okay, well, as she points out, the thing about the photograph is people assume that the photograph tells the truth, right? Because, it's a picture, it's one thing to describe a situation, it's one thing to say this is what it looked like, this is who was over here, this was over there, but we have a photograph of it, we tend to look at it and say, oh, that is a depiction of what happened. However, the photographer, or in this case the filmmaker, let's say, we've all heard the expression, it was left on the cutting room floor, right? The filmmaker, you can interview somebody for 3 hours and you need to distill it down to a 40-minute film, right? So the filmmaker makes a decision what to include and what to exclude. And it's happened very often, I don't say that this happened in your case, but it's happened very often that people are interviewed, let's say, And then, after a 90-minute interview, they have a 1.5-minute clip that appears on the news. And they're asked about that, and they say, well, that was taken out of context. That's not what I meant, okay? So even the most, let's call it objective and accurate depiction or description of facts still requires an analytical approach. And what happened here, what fails to happen here, is that the leaders have what I argue is an objectively accurate depiction of facts. And maybe, as you point out, not of all the facts, but of the facts that each one of them was very impressed with. One of them said, boy, look how red that apple is. Another one said, look how high those walls are. Another one said, look how big and tall those soldiers are, right? And they all came back, and instead of coming together, instead of bringing all of their impressions and their information gathering together, and instead of doing it in council, in private with Moshe and saying, this is like, here's what we saw, and let's figure out how to make this work. They come out in public, they open up their mouths and say, well, but it's this and this, this and that, and of course nobody can make a decision. Okay, so the big challenge that we're facing here is this challenge of everybody wants to be in charge, but nobody has the ability to take charge. Nobody's actually taking charge. And the people who have, if you will, the best of intentions, Caleb jumps up and says, let's just go. But he doesn't say, no, he does not address each of their objections. He does not say, yes, the walls are high, but did you notice that there was a back pathway? Yes, the soldiers are well armed, but did you notice that they have, etc., whatever it is, they're weak spots. Every strength, every strong point has a corresponding weak spot. Okay? That, again, to return to Lawrence of Arabia, it wasn't in the movie, but, the big Turkish garrison at the time was in the city of Medina, and the British kept on saying, why don't you go march on Medina? Why don't you march on Medina? And he said, because Medina is isolated. They have like one railway line leading in, they can't get all the troops out, we'll just leave them there. And he actually, the Arab forces won that part of World War I without ever having to engage the main body of the Turkish army, because they couldn't get out. Right? So if you understand and think tactically and think strategically, and you think towards what's my goal, what's my objective, you have a very different approach to facts than if you think of like, how am I going to do that? Or, I don't want to have to make that decision. Somebody's going to get hurt. I don't know. I don't want to be wrong. But if we have to take risks in life, and it's tough.
Doesn't Caleb do what Nachshon did? Nachshon didn't deal with the complaints of the different camps. He just did it. So
he was on his own.
Doing the same thing.
So I would say two things. First of all, in terms of my approach that I take in this book, is Nachshon does that in the Midrash. Does not do it in the text. And I'm more focusing on the text here. But I would say that there's a very fundamental difference, which is that Nachshon was not, Moshe did not say, let's see who's going to be first. Nachshon said, I have a choice. I'm going to go forward and take my chances, or I'm going to stand here and they're going to come and kill me. If I run into the water, maybe I can swim. Maybe I can tread water. Maybe I can get across to the other side, and maybe even there'll be a miracle. All I know for sure is that if I stand here and wait for something to happen, what's going to happen is not going to be good. And so he charged ahead. We have no idea, again, it's Midrash, it's not from the text, we have no idea what was actually in his mind at the time. Right? It's a very powerful Midrash, it's very beautiful. Right? I'm not denigrating the Midrash, God forbid, right? But what I'm saying is that here's a man who is faced with the choice of do something or do nothing. And he did something. And in many cases, that's what leadership is all about. And so sometimes the leader is just the person who says, you know what, in this situation, I'm going to do something. And by virtue of having been the one to do something, other people follow. Thank you very much. It's well, thank you. I'm very honored to been here today. I hope that you all enjoyed it. I enjoyed it tremendously. I thank the rabbis Goldberg and Diamond for making this happen. And Bezrat Hashem, I look forward to seeing you next week.